Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Answers on Eschatology. My name is Dan Derry, and I am the president of the Institute of Fulfilled Eschatology. We are in the middle of a study on Matthew chapter 24, and I want to begin to share some thoughts with you regarding the Great Tribulation of Matthew chapter 24 and 21. The first thing I'll say is that this is not the Neronic persecution that came upon the body of Christ between 64 and 66 AD. The Great Tribulation of Matthew chapter 24 was the wrath of God, the vengeance of God, and the judgment of God that came upon the nation of Israel through the instrument of the Roman army between 67 and 70 AD. It was the Jewish-Roman war, okay? And it was the judgment of God upon Israel, not the persecution of the church, okay? And I want to show you this by comparing Matthew chapter 24 and Luke chapter 21. Watch this. I've already done this a little bit in a previous video, but I really want to drive the point home that this Great Tribulation was a Jewish persecution. And it was the wrath and vengeance of God, okay? It was the judgment of God upon Old Covenant Israel. Watch this. In Matthew chapter 24, beginning in verse 15 and following, Jesus says this to his disciples. He says, when you see when you see the abomination of desolation, okay, flee to the mountains. And in verse 21, he says, for then would be the Great Tribulation. Okay, so when they saw the Great Tribulation, they were to flee to the mountains because then would be Great Tribulation. Luke puts it like this. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, flee to the mountains because those are the days of vengeance. In other words, the days of vengeance of Luke 21 and 22 are the Great Tribulation of Matthew 24:21. Okay? When they saw Jerusalem surrounded by armies, that was the abomination of desolation. They were to flee to the mountains when they saw that sign. And that, at that time, would be the days of vengeance, which would be the Great Tribulation that would come upon Israel. And in Luke 21:23, Jesus says this, for there will be great distress upon the land and wrath to this people. See, it was to this people, the Jews, Israel. That Great Tribulation, those days of vengeance, were wrath upon Old Covenant Israel. Now, here's what else I want to show you. I want to place the time of this Great Tribulation in the first century, okay? Because that's exactly where Jesus placed it. Notice, in Matthew 24, Jesus connects this Great Tribulation with the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. Matthew chapter 24, verse 2, Jesus prophesies, see all these stones? Not one will be left upon another. They will all be thrown down. And in verse 34, Jesus promises, verily, verily, I say unto you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Matthew 24, Jesus places the Great Tribulation, and he connects it to the destruction of Jerusalem in the first century. So does Jesus in Luke 21. He says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, know its desolation is near. That's the destruction of Jerusalem. And he says, at that time would be the days of vengeance. Okay, so that's the Great Tribulation, the vengeance and the wrath of God connected to the destruction of Jerusalem. And in verse 32 of Luke 21, Jesus once again promises, verily, verily, I say unto you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Jesus in both Matthew chapter 24 and Luke 21 connect the Great Tribulation, which is the vengeance of God, the days of vengeance, with the destruction of Jerusalem in the first century generation. And listen, the prophet Daniel does the same thing. Go back to Matthew chapter 24, and I want you to notice the language that Jesus uses regarding this Great Tribulation. He says, for then there will be great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will be. This Great Tribulation would be like no other that had happened before or would happen after. Go with me to Daniel chapter 12. Watch this. 12 and verse 1. Now at that time, Michael, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people, that's Israel, will arise. And there will be a time of distress, that's tribulation, such as has never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, everyone who's found written in the book, will be rescued. That's the great tribulation of Matthew chapter 24, verse 21. Jesus was quoting Daniel. Okay? So Jesus placed, once again, the great tribulation at the time of the destruction of Jerusalem in the first century. And so does Daniel. Jump down with me to verse 7 of Daniel 12. Daniel was told, he says, I heard the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river, and he raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever, that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. And as soon as they finished shattering the power of the holy people, all these events would be finished or completed. Now, all these events include the great tribulation of Daniel chapter 12, verse 1. So Daniel was told that the great tribulation would be accomplished when the power of the holy people was completely shattered. What was the power of Daniel's holy people, Israel? It was their covenant. It was their covenant union and relationship with Jehovah. This is what gave them power, authority. Okay? It's what made them the covenant people of God. And it's what separated them from every other nation. In a sense, they ruled the nations through the law, okay? They were God's representative nation upon earth. That was their power. That was their authority. But that power and that authority, watch this, was shattered in AD 70 when that old covenant and that old covenant world, when every sacrifice, all the rituals, that entire Mosaic system was completely shattered, fulfilled, and abolished through the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. Therefore, Daniel, just like Jesus, places the fulfillment of the Great Tribulation at the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. We have a perfect threefold witness that says and that testifies that the Great Tribulation of Daniel 12, verse 1, Matthew 24, verse 21, and Luke 21, verse 22, which is the days of vengeance, was fulfilled in the first century generation at the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. I don't know how in the world anyone can place this great tribulation in our future with that kind of testimony, inspired testimony. Well, we got lots more to say, guys, and we'll pick it up next time regarding the Great Tribulation on Answers on Eschatology. Bye for now.